Welcome to Forging Resilience, exploring for a different perspective on strength and leadership. Join me as we discuss experiences and stories with guests to help gain fresh insights around challenge, success, and leadership. Today on Forging Resilience, joined by Kaynika Townsend. Kaynika is a leadership and resilience and burnout consultant dedicated to helping leaders and teams in the financial and technology sectors, helping to prevent burnout and maintain a thriving work-life mix. She's got over a decade of experience in male-dominated industries like the rail sector, and she understands the challenges that are faced by high-achieving professionals. Through some of her programs, such as Women Arise, Kaynika provides tailored workshops, one-to-one coaching, and evidence-based interventions to help clients recognize and address signs of early burnout. So welcome to the show, Kaynika.
Thank you, Aaron, and what an introduction.
Yeah, well, I had a bit of help there, so let's dive straight into it, Kaynika. Give us a bit of your personal journey and what led you to be involved with resilience and leadership and burnout consulting.
So it wasn't a straightforward journey. I spent a number of years in the corporate space, being the only or among the few persons, what that meant being the only woman, the only Black person in some of those spaces. And what happened is that I felt myself constantly pushing and driving more for success. Very often, I guess, even though I knew that I was fully competent, fully capable to deliver, having that little thing on your shoulder that says, well, you got to make sure that you prove that, yes, you deserve to be there. And that did push me to a point of burnout. I remember remember one morning just being at my desk and fully exhausted and thinking, what's the point of continuing to do this work? And I knew it was time to leave. At the time, I didn't know it was burnout, didn't have that language for it, but I knew that I wasn't the same person that I had been, the same leader who had been passionate and loving the work that I did. It was time to leave. I left, and as I started to do project work, as my next field across various industries, I was starting to see a pattern in leaders similar to what I experienced. They were expected to carry the I don't want to say burden, but more the responsibility, as they should, of making sure that their team was okay. But there was no one above them actually making sure that they were okay, making sure their well-being was centered. And when I saw that, I said, aha, here is a gap. Here's a missing piece to the puzzle. Why there's so many leaders, particularly those who are what we call the middle leaders in the corporate space, end up burning out. And so I decided at that point in time to do something about it, to really step up and say, well, what can we do? And so I started to do research around burnout, do research around resilience. And I came across the Resilience Builder model, which is something that very beautifully looks at how it is that you can build resilience. And for me, it's that preventative approach where you build your resilience so you can better navigate stress and avoid burnout in the workplace. So that's a little bit about my own story.
Just going back to the beginning there, you felt you had to continuously drive and push to make sure that people saw it was a success. Is that something that you've found yourself moving into that state, or is that something that just manifested itself there and that you've always been like that?
I think it's a little bit of both. So I'm a high achiever, high performer. It has always been about, if you're going to do something, you're going to do it well. So there's a little bit of me in there, wanting to make sure that I am always giving it my best, so to speak. But then there is also externally, I would have conversations with my manager where he'd say, something like, for the position that you're in and the kind of way that you're paid, this is not done elsewhere in other companies or in industry. So, in other words, you really should be grateful, or for the way that you've risen up the ladder, really should be grateful. And that gave me pause because I remember responding to say, whilst I do acknowledge that this has been a tremendous opportunity, I also want to remind yourself and the company that if I wasn't competent, if I wasn't delivering, I wouldn't have remained in these positions. But it still gave me that pause in my head to say, they're watching. And I don't want them to think that somehow they made a mistake. So I have to make sure that I keep this up, always on top of it. And so there's a little bit of me who is I want to represent myself. I always say that it's my reputation on the line. But a little bit of the external saying, you should be grateful that you are here. You've been given this opportunity. And both were really working and driving me towards more of that. You've got to keep going. You've got to keep proving that they were right to have put you here. And that was really, really a lot of what fueled my own burnout.
So, from somebody from the outside, paint us a picture of that. Just like you said, you've got to keep proving. You've got to keep driving. What does that actually look like for somebody that doesn't understand that, or that might be able to connect the dots themselves because they recognize those patterns? What does that look like for you?
I really like that question. So that looked like a bit of perfection. So making sure that when we were asked to produce reports, I remember there was always this thing where when the reports came from my team, I was always double, triple checking to make sure that, oh my God, every I was dotted, every T was crossed. And to a certain degree, as a manager, you really want to make sure that that's happening. But it got to the point where it it was too much. And in fact, that fell over into how then the team was managed, because there was always that sense of, oh my God, well, you missed that. So um, let's do that again. So it's really this, the standard was so high in that respect that it was driving not only me to be working longer hours, but in some respects almost demanding that of the team without actually explicitly saying that. So it could look like that. It could also look like, as I've mentioned, to the longer hours. So you had your long list of to do, and the day would never end because it was always this thought that you always have to make sure everything was done before you left. So if 5 o'clock came and it wasn't finished, let's keep working a little bit longer, or let's go home and continue working, and sometimes working the weekends as well. So it looks again like the longer hours, and not just in an intense period, as happens sometimes where there might be a project that you need to work a little bit longer. This was consistently happening across days, weeks, months. And that's just simply not sustainable, where you're consistently working the longer hours, um, doing that much more than is required of you. And that was the other piece where because you're trying to prove that, yeah, I am, you know, deserving to be here. It's going the extra mile, always doing more than is required. And in one year you say, but that's good. That's what companies want, right? But it wasn't strategic. It was it was what I call now being the workhorse. So even taking on other pieces of work from other people. Oh, well, I would do that. It's okay. I would do that. So it meant that even at times where colleagues should have been doing their bits, I ended up taking on some of that because not just was I volunteering to do that, but the company was also willing to say, well, the work needs to be done. And since she is very good at doing XYZ, we can push a little bit more her way just to make sure that it is done. So that's some of the ways in which it showed up. And as I said, over time, it was just simply not sustainable. And the way this manifested in behaviors was that I was starting to be short with people. I was starting to be short with people. I remember one of the first times someone in HR pulled me aside and they said, "Hey, God, we just want to check to make sure you're all right. You don't seem to be your normal self." And good on them for noticing that something was different. But here's what I found interesting, that my response to them was, well, actually, um, I am okay. I'm just being more vocal about the stress and the strain that I'm feeling. And I think the workload is unreasonable. What they paid attention to was the behavior and not the root of the problem.
Yeah.
So that was the interesting piece for me. So good on them, as I said, to notice the change in behavior, which it was clearly one of the early signs of my burnout. But their focus was altogether wrong. In just saying, "Oh well, it seems." I think I had handled as well. Around that time, I had handled a very unfortunate incident that had happened at work, which would have impacted like the team and the broader company. And I was dead there at the incident for it. And they thought that that was the reason for the change in my behavior. And I was like, nah, this is a long time coming. I'm just being more vocal about the fact that this is not okay.
Hmm. Hmm. So, in your personal experience, and also working with corporate clients, what are some of the, if we really start to peel back the layers? I know there's both the institution or the corporation type of roots of the problem, but I'm also interested in the personal side of the problem. What are some of the patterns or the most common causes, roots of people having that tendency to burn out or overachieve or take a lot more on, or tie into perfectionism? What could you talk a little bit around that?
Yeah, I think on a personal level, it's such a mixed bag. It again, if I think back to myself, so you're making a distinction between what was happening on the organization level that would have impacted burnout and what's happening on the personal level. When I look back at myself, I mentioned that perfectionism was definitely one of them. There was a little bit of the control as well in thinking that in some respect, if there's something to be done, then I would need to do it because you fear that, again, linking back to wanting to make sure your reputation is held in good stead. If you've allowed a team member to do it and it's just not done right, and you're like, it means I'm going to have to take back control of this thing. So there is a sense of wanting to make sure that we're controlling what was happening in a way that would protect yourself as a leader, as a reputation for yourself and even for the company, and not being able to let go enough and see the opportunities for delegating that would even also help others to be able to develop. And it's okay to be able to fail. And that was one of the things that lessons that I had to be learning along the way, that, listen, it's okay to get it wrong sometimes. It's okay for things to go wrong. It doesn't mean that you're a complete failure. You've learned the lesson. You have the opportunity to learn the lesson to say, well, maybe let's do it differently the next time. So along with the perfectionism, there was that whole matter of controlling, really wanting to be in control. And for a lot of us, especially, as leaders, we do want to be in control. We don't want to feel like somehow we don't know what's going to be able to be next. And how do we predict what's going to be next? We control what is happening.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was another element of it, and I guess another part of it. I spoke at the beginning where I said I was often in spaces where I was the only or the few, and I had been taught unconsciously that for me to get ahead, I had to work twice as hard.
Hmm.
So there was a cultural aspect of that for me, that as a Black woman, you have to, for you to achieve, for you to get ahead to where you want to be, you're going to have to work twice as hard anyway. So I was doing it. I was making sure I was doing my part to be able to succeed. So these were some of the other elements where sometimes within us, there is a drive. And I like that question because it's unpicking what some of the thinking that's going on within the individual that's driving them to behave in a particular way. So I would say there was a bit of the perfectionism, there's a bit of the control, but there is that cultural piece for me where it's like, you're going to have to work twice as hard. And so that's what I was doing.
Yeah. Yeah. If I reflect on my own experience in complete different sectors where I've led into some of those behaviors that you're mentioning, for me, the root cause is fear. I don't want to be judged. I don't want to be rejected. I don't want to be humiliated. So I will, do everything I can to stay away from that. For me. So in terms of recognizing burnout, Kai, what's some of the things that we might be able to look out for in ourselves or friends or colleagues?
So that's a good question. The WHO, the way they define burnout, they specifically link it to the workplace, and they say it's where there is stress that has not been successfully managed. And they look at three dimensions of it. So they talk about the cynicism. They talk about exhaustion. And then they talk about where you might feel that you're no longer as effective. So what that could look like in behavior with the cynicism, I spoke about earlier, where, I was, at my desk one morning at work, and that didn't happen overnight, by the way.
Yeah.
It wasn't the first time I was thinking, why am I still doing this? Why am I even here? What impact is this even having in terms of my role anymore? And so there was that thinking that it didn't come for the first, and I was really, really now reflecting on what's the point, so to speak. The second piece is exhaustion. So very often, we can come off a period of an intense work on a project, and it's like, I feel tired, I feel exhausted. But again, when you're starting to feel more tired than usual, more exhausted than usual, you hear yourself saying that repeatedly over a period of time. So we talk about the Monday blues. When it becomes that, I am actually feeling this way every day of the week, not just on Monday. I've just come from the weekend where I've rested, and yet still I'm dreading going into this week. I've come back from holiday and I'm ready to go on the holiday again. Another sign that you might be teetering into that period of burnout. And then the third piece about just how you start to doubt your own abilities. That one showed up in a weird way for me, because in a funny way, I still felt competent to do the work. What I didn't feel competent about was my ability to get over what I saw as barriers in my way of getting to the next level. I'm like, I don't know what to do here. I think I was competent in being able to get up so far, but no longer. So that can show up for other people where they're saying, They're doubting their ability to do the very work they've been doing for so long. Despite evidence of their success, they're beginning to think to themselves that this is not something that they're capable of doing. So if you see signs like that in yourself, or if you hear in conversations with friends or family that these three things are appearing, a bit of cynicism repeatedly, exhaustion all the time, lack of, confidence in their own abilities to do the very thing that they've been doing all this time, then these are some early signs that they might be heading into burnout.
So again, from your own personal experience and things that you teach your clients, what's some of the most successful, like easy go-to strategies to put in place before people start dipping into the exhaustion and like noticing their efficiency drop off, or productivity drop off, or start to question themselves in place?
So I talk about building flow into your life, and it's an acronym that represents F for finding your stuck points. So really being very aware of what are the things that are actually draining you, draining your energy, and blocking your ability to move forward. Having that reflection goes a long way in being able to say, wait a second, this might be what's causing me to feel exhausted. This is what's draining my energy. The second piece, the L, is from learning from your past data. So there are things that would have things that are working for you, things that are not working for you. So if you reflect on your own journey, I say, very often people think that when in terms of building resilience, that it's something completely new. No, we all have a level of resilience coming in, and there's things that we'd have done in the past that would have helped us. So what is it when you think back to your own experience that you could use right now to be able to help you? So learning from the data of the past. And then the O for me is optimizing your strategy. So you've done that reflection piece. Where am I stuck? It's draining me. What is it that has worked for me? What hasn't worked for me either? And then optimizing the strategy. So thinking about your next steps in terms of, is it that I need to be connecting more with people, reaching out for help with a mentor, a sponsor, a coach? What is it that I need to be doing differently to be able to help me with delivering what I have to do, but in a more sustainable way? And then the W for me is weaving in resilient practices. So when you think about building resilience, it's not just about the big things. It's doing the small things consistently on a daily basis that helps you to build up the resilience. So that could look like, how are you energizing yourself? Is it that walks in the morning helps? Is it that in the middle of the day, you're being intentional about taking that pause, taking that break so that you can allow yourself to be refreshed before you continue on the day? So just looking at the small things that you can do consistently that will allow you to be more focused, to be more energized, so that you can have a more sustainable approach to your life. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. And my question to you is, if I put my old school, old man hat on literally and say that sounds like rubbish, does it take somebody to sometimes crash and burn out before they turn to these preventative strategies and taking that inward look and practicing, like you said there, those the opportunity to weave resilience into our daily life?
I think what I've found very often is that people go through cycles of burnout. So, like in my experience, when I experienced burnout, I didn't even know it was burnout.
Mm.
I just knew that I got to the point where I could not continue doing what I was doing. I even had to end up leaving the job, right? Um, and so very often people will go through this thing where it's high stress, and somehow they realize something is wrong. They have figured out a way to change that for that time, but then they go right back into habits that bring them back into that cycle of stress and burnout. And the reason for that is it's the approach is more just out in the fire rather than looking at what's the systemic problem, even within myself, that's causing these fires to keep coming up. And so to answer your question about it, that's just a load of nonsense. If each person were to look at their life, we're talking about those who are experiencing high stress and potential burnout. If you look back at your life, very often you would have noticed that there were periods where you were like high stress, high stress, high stress, crash. There's something you did. You either went on a holiday, or you just took the time out, or you started reconnecting with something that was good for you, and then you just went back into the high stress crash. So the question is, why is that happening? And the answer is that your approach to it is just short term. You're just thinking about, how can I in this moment feel better? But the reflection piece with that flow is allowing you to think on a more long term basis, getting to the root of why is this happening, and therefore what needs to change fundamentally that will allow me to, on a more regular basis, be able to navigate the stress. Because I think it's important to also say that stress in and of itself isn't bad.
Mm.
So you will find that research talks about how we're started a new job, or you're going to start a new project, and there's this excitement, there's a little bit of stress, and that kind of stress is good stress that allows you the kind of creativity and flow to kind of get the job done. Where we move into bad stress is where you are now in a heightened period of stress for a sustained period of time. And that chronic stress is what leads to burnout. That's what we're talking about. That's the one where you feel stuck, you feel blocked, you feel your energy feels depleted. So if you don't take the opportunity to step back and think about, why is it that I'm stuck? What's causing me to be stuck? What's actually worked in the past? How can I then optimize a new way of being and weave those things, those small things, into my everyday life? Then you will continue to go through that cycle of stress, crash, recover, stress, crash, recover, rather than a much more sustainable way of being, which is about building that resilience to be able to navigate stress better in your life.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Yeah, and I guess for some people that can be quite surface level, but for others, there's a whole set of beliefs which they have to start to question or reflect on, because it keeps driving them towards those patterns, those learned behaviors and habits. So, what does resilience mean to you, Kai?
So resilience for me is the ability to identify a way of being that is healthy for me, that I can navigate the highs and lows of life.
Hmm.
So it's essentially, when you just mentioned the behaviors. So what are the practices and behaviors that I am incorporating in my life that allows me in a healthy way to navigate life, whether high, the good things are happening, or low, the bad things are happening? There's something about that consistency. How how can what I call flow through that? That for me is what resilience is about. It's not about pushing through no matter
Mm,
what. It's not about this putting on this kind of defense or front bracing, like, um uh, for some they talk about not showing any weakness, any signs of weakness. Not at all. Part of resilience for me is the ability as well to know when to pause, when to rest, knowing that actually this is what my capacity is like, and so therefore I can't take on more. I need to pause here. I need to rest. So that's what resilience is for me.
brilliant. Love it. How do you see things evolving in since you've come from a corporate sector, now you're helping people in the corporate sector? How do you see, the future of resilience and well-being in the workplace? Or what would you like to see for people that are in those high pressure jobs and sectors?
It's interesting because I think more than a decade ago, there was hardly any talk of well-being or resilience in the workspace, and now it's the the place is awash with talks of well-being month, and well-being activities. So what we're seeing is, um know that the conversation is opening, and companies, whether it is that they are delighted to do it or not, they are now talking more about well-being, and even having, I've noticed in some of their employee survey, there's a question around well-being. So that's really, really a good shift, and we absolutely welcome that. I think where I see going though is, at the moment, there's a tendency as part of that company's approach to supporting employee well-being is saying, oh, here is a employee health line that, if you're in crisis or you need help, you can go to and use. And so it's about more the recovery. And I think the future is about the preventative side of things.
Hmm.
How can we do things differently in a way that actually creates an environment for psychological safety, which is a big part of well-being and allowing people to be more resilient? How can we do things in a way that doesn't cost the well-being of our employees while we are aiming to drive success? So for me, I think companies, whether it is that they are choosing to do so willingly or not, will have to start to take that preventative approach, and not just the, oh, we are doing this from a recovery point of view. You look stressed. Here is some help. It's how do we prevent you from getting to those high levels of stress? And I'll say one more thing. The younger generation of labor that's coming in, of employees that's coming in, they're already demanding that. They're already asking for that. They are looking for employers where things like flexibility in the way that they work, focus on well-being, because these are values that are important to them. And if these employers don't have those values, they're choosing other employers. So the labor market itself will start to push that in a way that will become more evident. And let's not forget that that burnout does cost the business. It costs the business in high turnover, in high absenteeism, in high presenteeism, and low productivity. So for me, I see the trends in the future where there will be a lot more data around that. So when we're having these conversations, it wouldn't just be that when we talk about well-being, companies immediately are thinking about, oh, a bit of fruit in the break room, or a yoga session or break. And don't get me wrong, all of these things are important, but they do not get to the root cause of what is causing burnout in individuals, and therefore what's impacting ultimately the company and the person's personal life.
Great. Kai, as we start to wrap up here today, is there anything you'd like to mention or talk about before we close out?
I like to say that, two things: that burnout doesn't happen overnight. It slowly creeps up. And I seen many spaces where I use a term nobody wants to be told that their baby's ugly. It's a borrowed phrase. And so very often when I speak to individuals in the corporate space, they are willing to acknowledge that, oh my God, I really do. Yes, I really do feel like I'm in burnout. But when then you start to talk to the leaders or those who are the decision makers, very often they're reticent to have that conversation because, of course, they don't want to be seen as, oh, my employee has burnout. Um, and so I'm mindful to say, let us let us not wait until burnout becomes a bigger issue. The Mental Health UK Burnout Report for the second year in a row has said that 1 in 5 UK workers have taken time out of work because of high stress. And therefore, we do have a problem here. So, how can we address this before it becomes a bigger issue? And this is about employing things like resilience training as part of your well-being programs in the workplace, allowing the ability to have open conversations around what's causing stress. How can we do things differently, both from an individual point of view, but from a company point of view, to make sure that burnout does not become the sacrifice or the cost that is paid for success?
Love it. So how might people get in touch with you, Kai, if they're interested in indeed your resilience program or just starting that conversation about what's going on for them or how you can support?
So LinkedIn is the best place to find me. Please do connect with me on LinkedIn. I would welcome conversations about how it is that I can build tailor-made resilience program for companies, where we look at we start with a resilience assessment and then use that as a basis to really look at what is needed for your team or your particular organization. I also welcome conversations where maybe if you're not ready for that tailor-made program, that we could start with conversations around building resilience and navigating stress through perhaps a lunch and learn or a talk with your ERGs. I'd absolutely welcome those opportunities to have those conversations with you. Connect with me on LinkedIn.
Brilliant. Well, Kai, thanks so much for taking the time to speak to us today, sharing a bit about your story and giving us some frameworks and insights there. It's been an absolute pleasure. So thanks very much, and I'll speak to you soon.
Thank you, Aaron, for this opportunity.